I remember once, a woman I dated told me something I'll never forget. She said, "Matt, I didn't walk away because I stopped caring. I walked away because I finally started caring about myself more than I cared about convincing you. And I'll be honest, I didn't get it then. But a month later, I was lying in bed at 1:43 in the morning, staring at the ceiling, wondering why her silence was so damn loud." See, here's what no one tells you. It's not the breakup text that stays with you, it's the silence that follows it. That silence becomes a mirror, not of her, but of you. And when a woman walks away without begging, crying, or chasing, that's not indifference, that's power. And that is what this message is about today. Because he thought it was over when he rejected you. But what's breaking him down now is your silence. Let's talk about why. When people hear the word silence, they often confuse it with passivity. They assume that if you're not speaking, not reacting, not making noise, then you've given up. But silence true, deliberate silence is not surrender, it is discipline, it is restraint, and more importantly, it is power. I remember watching someone I cared about deeply walk away from a relationship. Not mine, but someone close to me. And instead of fighting to stay, instead of chasing the man who said he wasn't ready, she just stopped. No long messages, no attempts to clarify or fix things. She got quiet. Not cold quiet. She started focusing on her work, her friends, her goals. And within weeks, he came circling back, not because she played a game, but because she created space. A space he could no longer occupy freely. In my own life, I've had moments where I felt the urge to respond, to explain, to argue, especially in moments of loss. But I learned, painfully at times, that energy is a finite resource. And every moment you spend trying to be understood by someone who's already decided to misunderstand you is a withdrawal from your own account. See, silence, when rooted in self-respect, isn't passive, it's protective. It sends a clear message: you don't get to decide my value by your acceptance or rejection of me. That kind of silence disrupts the ego. It leaves the other person with nothing to grab onto, no words to twist, no drama to feed on, just space, and in that space, reflection grows. So no, silence isn't emptiness, it's the sound of someone reclaiming their power. Rejection has this way of making people feel like they failed, like it's proof they weren't good enough, attractive enough, or lovable enough. But that's a shallow interpretation. Rejection isn't a verdict on your worth. It's a revelation. It shows you where your identity is anchored. And if that identity collapses when someone says, "I don't want this," it means you were building your sense of self on approval that was never guaranteed. I've had to face that in my own life. Early in my career, I put a tremendous amount of emotional weight on being accepted, whether it was in personal relationships, professionally, or even just socially. And every rejection felt like a hit to who I was. Not just what I wanted, but over time, I started to see it differently. The moment someone says no to you, or "you're not what I'm looking for," what actually happens is you get to see yourself more clearly. You get to ask, did I tie my value to this person's choice? Did I give them the authority to shape how I see myself? There was a woman I worked with, smart, beautiful, deeply thoughtful. A man ended things with her, and instead of spiraling, she asked herself, what did this moment teach me about what I want, what I tolerate, and how I show up? She didn't crumble, she clarified. That's what rejection can do. It strips away illusion, and it reveals your level of emotional independence. What you do after rejection says far more about you than the rejection itself. It reveals your strength, your clarity, and your ability to stand unshaken in the face of someone else's inability to recognize your value. Rejection doesn't shrink you. It shows you how big you're capable of becoming. In emotionally charged moments, people often anticipate chaos. They expect heightened emotion, conflict, pleading the full theatrical fallout. Especially in relationships, when someone ends things, there's often a subtle, unspoken craving for the ego boost that comes from watching the other person fall apart. It affirms their importance. It feeds their sense of control. He expected that. He expected you to cry, to argue, to chase. What he wasn't prepared for was the space you gave him instead. And that space, it's uncomfortable. Because in the absence of noise, he's left with his own thoughts. No validation, no emotional outburst to reassure him he mattered. Just silence. And silence is hard to interpret when someone is used to being centered in your emotional world. I've witnessed this dynamic in people I've coached. A client of Minnie-Ann, intelligent, grounded woman walked away from a relationship that ended suddenly and unfairly. She didn't send a series of angry texts. She didn't show up to explain herself. She got quiet. And a few weeks later, that man came back, confused and unsettled, asking why she was so cold. But it wasn't coldness, it was composure. She gave him the gift of distance. And in doing so, she disrupted the narrative he thought he'd written. I've done this myself in professional settings. When someone tries to provoke, bait, or manipulate you emotionally, the greatest response isn't confrontation, it's detachment. It's saying, I'm not going to perform for your expectations. That's what real power looks like. So when he expected drama and you gave him distance, you didn't lose him, you disarmed him. Because nothing is more destabilizing to someone who expected to be chased than the realization that you were strong enough to let them go without a single word. There's a misconception that communication only happens through words, that if you don't say something, you're not really saying anything at all. But that's not true. Absence can be more articulate than any speech, more resonant than any message. The quiet you leave behind speaks volumes in a language that's hard to ignore. It's the void that fills his thoughts, the gap that rewrites his story without you even being there. I've seen this in many aspects of life, professionally, personally. When someone important to you pulls back without explanation, the silence can be deafening. One close friend of mine went through a breakup, and the man she cared about expected her to call, to check in, to seek closure, but she didn't. She disappeared from his world gently but firmly, focusing on herself instead. That absence wasn't just noticed, it became an overwhelming presence. It made him realize how much her energy, her attention, her very being had filled spaces in his life he took for granted. I've had similar experiences in my career. When a partnership ends or an opportunity closes, the way you step away can leave a lasting impression, sometimes more so than any confrontation or explanation could. The absence of your involvement, your enthusiasm, your commitment signals the end far more clearly than any words. It forces reflection. It demands reconsideration. In relationships, this absence removes the safety net. He no longer has your reactions to gauge himself by. He no longer has your presence to soothe his doubts. That silence becomes a mirror reflecting what he's lost, and often that mirror is harsher than any spoken accusation or plea. Your absence says, more clearly than any conversation ever could, you are no longer available, and you won't be replaced. There's a common misconception that control in relationships is about who speaks louder, who chases harder, or who makes the most noise. But true control, real power often comes quietly, without a word spoken. When someone walks away silently after rejection, they reclaim the narrative without a single argument. They don't beg for validation or plead for attention. Instead, they take back their control simply by stepping away and refusing to engage on someone else's terms. I've seen this in my own experience, both personally and professionally. There was a time when I faced rejection. Someone chose to end a connection, thinking they held the power. In those moments, the impulse is often to explain, to convince, to reclaim control by talking more. But what I learned was that stepping back quietly was far more powerful. By withdrawing, I stopped feeding into the dynamic that gave the other person authority over my sense of self. I took back control not by confrontation, but by absence. I've also witnessed this with people. I've crocheted a woman who was deeply hurt by a breakup, chose not to respond to messages, not to chase explanations. Her silence spoke louder than any argument. It disrupted the expected pattern. The man thought he controlled the situation because he walked away, but her quiet withdrawal flipped the power dynamic. She was no longer a participant in a game he tried to dominate. Control isn't about dominance. It's about choosing where and how you invest your energy. When you refuse to engage in the drama or desperation expected of you, you reclaim your sovereignty. You take back control, not with noise, but with calm, deliberate silence. Sometimes the loudest message is the one you don't have to say at all. When someone rejects us, it's natural to want answers, to seek closure, or to try and mend what feels broken. But what if, instead of filling the silence with explanations, apologies, or pleas, you simply step back and stay quiet? That silence isn't empty. It's a space where real reflection happens. Your silence forces him to sit with his decision in a way that words never could. I've seen this dynamic unfold many times. A close friend of mine ended a relationship and chose not to chase or explain herself. She didn't call to justify or text to plead for clarity. Instead, she withdrew quietly. And in that absence, her ex was left with his own thoughts without the comfort of her presence or the reassurance of her responses. It made him confront what he'd lost without the distractions of drama or emotion. It was uncomfortable for him because he wasn't used to sitting with the consequences of his choice without being reassured. In my own life, I've learned that silence can be a powerful tool. It's the difference between reacting impulsively and allowing space for clarity to emerge. When you don't give someone the closure they expect, you deny them the easy exit of feeling justified or relieved. Instead, you hold the mirror up and let them face their decision honestly. This is not about punishment, it's about self-respect. By not engaging, you set a boundary that says your worth isn't up for debate or renegotiation, and that boundary forces him to reckon with his choice in solitude. Sometimes, the most profound message you can send isn't in what you say, but in what you choose not to say. True confidence is often misunderstood as something loud and performative, constant display of bravado, charm, or persuasion. But real confidence doesn't perform. It withdraws. It steps back. It holds its ground silently and unshakably, not needing to prove anything to anyone. I've witnessed this in many areas of life, including my own. Early on, I believed confidence meant being the loudest voice in the room, the one who could command attention through words alone. But life has a way of teaching you otherwise. The most powerful moments I've experienced weren't when I was speaking, but when I was listening, observing, and holding my space without reaction. There was a woman I know who, after being rejected, chose not to fight or chase. She didn't perform sadness or anger. She didn't send messages trying to convince him of her worth. Instead, she quietly withdrew. Her silence was not a sign of weakness, but a testament to her inner strength. That quiet withdrawal unsettled him far more than any emotional outburst ever could. This kind of confidence is rooted in a deep understanding of self-worth. It's not about needing others to see you as valuable because you already know it. It's about refusing to be drawn into someone else's drama or validation cycle. It's the calm assurance that you don't have to prove your value, you embody it. Real confidence is self-contained and deliberate. It's the refusal to perform for someone who doesn't recognize your worth. And that quiet strength speaks volumes without saying a word. True power often lives in the space where you choose to step back, not step forward. There's a profound difference between physically leaving a situation and truly removing your energy from it. Leaving is just an akshana step away, but removing your energy is an act of sovereignty. It's when you stop investing your attention, your care, your emotional bandwidth into someone who has already chosen to walk away from you. That's where real power lives. I've seen this many times in my life and the lives of those I've worked with. One client of mine was devastated after a breakup, but instead of texting, calling, or waiting for explanations, she decided to stop showing up emotionally. She stopped reacting to his messages, stopped wondering about his day, stopped holding space for his presence in her mind. She removed her energy, and with that, she reclaimed her power. In my own experience, I've learned that energy is finite. You can't pour from an empty cup, and you certainly can't maintain your worth by chasing after someone who doesn't reciprocate. Removing your energy isn't cold or cruel, it's an act of self-preservation. It's a boundary that says, I will no longer fuel a relationship that doesn't honor me. When you remove your energy, you strip away the foundation he relied on, the attention, the affection, the care. Suddenly, the dynamic shifts. He's left to face the reality that his choices have consequences beyond just your physical absence. The emotional presence you once provided disappears. And that absence is felt more deeply than any words or confrontations ever could. Removing your energy is not about punishment. It's about reclaiming your peace and protecting your worth. The moment you stop investing your energy, you start building your freedom. Closure is often thought of as a conversation and explanation, a final talk, a mutual understanding that wraps things up neatly. But what if closure isn't about words at all? What if closure is found in silence? Your silence is your closure, and it's one of the most profound statements you can make after rejection. In my experience, I've seen people chase closure endlessly. They seek conversations to understand why, to explain themselves, or to get reassurance. But those talks can trap you in a cycle of needing validation from someone who's already made a decision. True closure comes when you stop seeking external answers and start creating internal peace. I remember a close friend who went through a painful breakup. Instead of pleading for explanations or sending messages, she chose silence. She didn't respond to calls or texts. At first, it felt like a void, both for her and for the person who left. But over time, that silence became a powerful boundary, a clear line drawn without a single word. It was her way of saying, I'm done searching for reasons. I'm moving forward on my own terms. This silence gave her freedom. It stopped the cycle of emotional back and forth and allowed her to heal in her own space. She didn't need his agreement or understanding to find peace. She found it within herself by choosing not to engage. So remember, your silence isn't absence or avoidance. It's a deliberate act of closure that doesn't depend on anyone else's approval. It's a way to reclaim your story and end the chapter on your own terms. Sometimes silence speaks louder than any conversation ever could. What's fascinating about rejection and breakups is that people often assume the person who walked away isn't affected, that they're free and unbothered. But the truth is much more complex. He's not haunted by you. He's haunted by what he let go. I've seen this in my own life. Watching relationships end and observing the aftermath. When someone chooses to walk away, they often expect relief, the freedom from obligation, the chance to move on quickly. But what follows is often a quieter, deeper struggle. The ghost that lingers isn't you as a person. It's the loss of what you represented, the consistency, the care, the connection that was real and meaningful. A friend of mine went through this recently. He ended a relationship, believing he had made the right choice. But as weeks passed, he began to feel a hollow space where her presence used to be, not because he missed her in a shallow way, but because he realized the value of what he gave up. He started to question if his decision was rushed or if he had underestimated her strength and worth. That's the key. The haunting comes from loss, not from the person. It's about the awareness that something important slipped through his fingers, our stability, a respect, a love that was steady and true. He didn't just lose a partner. He lost a part of his own emotional foundation. This haunting doesn't always surface immediately. Sometimes it creeps in slowly, in quiet moments, when distractions fade. And it's a powerful reminder that the most profound impact you have on someone isn't in the drama or the fight, it's in the absence, in what they no longer have because they walked away. He's not haunted by you. He's haunted by what he chose to leave behind. In the end, your silence is not weakness. It's the strongest declaration of your worth. It's the quiet power that shifts the story, not through noise or drama, but through calm, confidence, and self-respect. When you step away without chasing, you reclaim your energy, your peace, and your future. Remember, you don't need anyone's validation to know your value. The space you create speaks louder than any words ever could. So stand firm in your silence, embrace your power, and move forward with grace, because true strength isn't in reaction, but in intentional action.